Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a very special webinar indeed. I'm Else Churchill, the genealogist at the Society of Genealogists, one of the data partners of Findmypast. The Society is the largest and oldest genealogical society in the country and has a remarkable genealogical library and education centre in London. This is a second talk looking at genealogical problems, and this time I'll be concentrating on research before 1837, i.e. before the census years and the start of civil registration of births, marriages and deaths in England and Wales. I shall be looking at problems that occur when researching with the most commonly used records before 1837, notably parish records, and I'll also look at some name-rich sources that supplement these. I'll illustrate that you need to understand what the records can show at this period and what you can reasonably expect to find, and if you can't find something, why not? Of course, many of the principles of research and techniques and tips on searching records that I looked at in my earlier talk are applicable before 1837, and I do recommend you listen to that talk, which you'll find online as well as this. Having been founded over 100 years ago, the Society is well used to helping and advising family historians with their research problems. Believe me, we all have them. While we can't always guarantee to solve your particular problems or find things that don't exist, we do believe there are general themes and issues that are common to many genealogical conundrums, and I hope this talk will have some ideas and insights into your research and give you something to think about and apply to your own family history. As before, this talk will look at case studies and ideas for solving problems, and we appreciate that you might have a number of questions to ask as we go through the presentation. So don't forget we've got a box on the left for you to ask questions, but if you'd like to wait until the end and see if something is answered during the presentation, that's fine too. We'll have time after I finish talking where we'll stick around and you can keep asking those questions. The most important records used by family historians after census and birth, marriage and death certificates are the local records of the church, baptisms, marriages and burials recorded in parish registers. They start from 1538 in England and Wales, though not all registers survive as far back as that. Originals are usually found in a local record office, rather than held by the church itself, although if you visit a record office, it's most likely you'll use a fiche or film of the registers, as the originals are too fragile to handle, and more people are reliant on using indexed digital images of the records online. Copies and transcripts can be found at the Society of Genealogists or through a local Mormon family history centre too. Many are indexed online on various websites, including, of course, Findmypast. It's the extra annotations of the vicar and comments that can make these records come alive. Look at the occupations shown in this christening register from 1813 and the name of the vicar. In the previous talk, I recommended using the parish and topographical maps in the Fillmore Atlas and Index of Parish Registers to really get a feel for the parishes where their ancestors lived. You'll come back to this time and time again, and I encourage you to get to know the records of your parish in detail. My earlier talks showed some useful online mapping tools and sources about parishes that are essential if using church records. The Atlas lists all parishes that were in existence in 1832, showing the dates they start, where the originals are deposited, which is the appropriate registration district, and if they are covered by major indexes such as the IGI on Family Search or Boyd's Marriage Index. If you want to learn more about using registers, you'll find some useful expert advice on the help pages on the Findmypast website, or download a free information record guide from the Learn pages of the SOG website. Here I'll be looking at hints and tips that might help solve brick walls by using parish registers. It's always a challenge identifying which website has indexes and/or images for a particular parish and keeping up with new additions. The Family Search Wiki is a useful website to help work out which parish registers are indexed and where. I can't stress enough how important it is to check the original record against what it says in a transcription or online indexed. Here is an entry relating to Elizabeth Smith, baptised the daughter of Susan Smith in 1828 in the parish of St Wynards in Herefordshire. No father's name is noted in the entry, so we assume that Elizabeth is illegitimate and the father is unknown. Now, while the christenings are indexed online on Family Search, there is as yet no digital image of the original registers of St Wynards on any online site. So to check the original entry, I currently have to look at the films either at the Herefordshire Record Office or at a microfilm copy available through a local LDS Family History Centre, or, as is convenient to me, use the microfilm copy at the Library of the Society of Genealogists. Here you can see the actual entry is found in the register. I found this entry while I was looking for some of my Churchills baptised in the same parish, and my eye was drawn to the entry, which had rather more writing than usual. The entry does indeed show Elizabeth as the illegitimate daughter of Susan Smith, but the vicar has written that the father is supposedly either her own brother, and a story of incest is not one anyone will want to find, but that's possibly more preferable in the vicar's mind, as he goes on to suggest that the father was more probably the wanton preacher who was lodging in the family, 3 exclamation marks, a wolf in sheep's clothing, 5 exclamation marks. The extra annotation on the original record doesn't fit in any suitable box for an online index, and while there's actually no name noted here, there are plenty of clues that can be followed up. And given that I found this entry while looking for one of my ancestors, I have the added bonus of knowing what my ancestors were gossiping about in 1828. It pays to know what information to expect from the parish registers. While the standard printed registers instigated under Rose's Parish Register Act of 1812 required vicars to note only the date of baptism, here Henry Glossop, the Vicar of Isleworth, has handily squeezed the dates of birth in too. As you can see, the christenings usually, but not always, occurred a few weeks after the birth. One significant problem, of course, is that marriage registers before 1837 are not as informative as those after. Hardwicke's Marriage Act of 1753, for the better prevention of irregular or clandestine marriages, licensed Anglican churches and ensured there should be separate, though inconsistent, marriage registers from 1754, recording the status, such as spinster or bachelor, whether by banns or by licence, and the signatures or marks of at least 2 witnesses. It did not insist that the father's name or occupation be noted or the exact age of the bride or groom. The Act ensured that separate banns books should be maintained, recording the date that the banns were called on 3 consecutive Sundays before the wedding, though of course the calling of banns or the issuing of a licence does not always guarantee that the wedding actually took place. Someone may have objected, or the couple called off the wedding for any number of reasons. However, one important point to note is that everyone was expected to marry in a licensed Anglican church. Only Jews and Quakers were exempt, and we'll look at nonconformity later on in the talk. So here we have an entry online for the marriage in Ashby de la Zouche in Leicestershire, showing simply that Thomas Smith married Alice Swinfield in 1768. No image is online, so you have to track down the register through the local record offices, or to see if you can view the film or fiche copy through the local LDS centre or at the SOG. When we do, we find the registers for the parish of Ashby de la Zouche, as we see here, is a fairly typical page from a marriage register after Hardwicke's Act. See how different it looks from what you've been used to after 1837. With no information about exact age, fathers' names or occupations, you have to look much harder for clues, but there certainly are clues in the original record that aren't found in the indexed transcription online. Note that the top entry says that the bride, Alice Swinfield, was of the parish of Smithby, or what actually turns out to be Smisby, in Derbyshire, whereas the groom was of this parish, Ashby de la Zouche. Although divided by county line and with records in different record offices, and indeed with records on different websites, Ashby de la Zouche and Smisby are neighbouring parishes. One of the witnesses to Alice's marriage is John Swinfield, probably a relative. Interestingly, John Brightmore seems to witness many marriages in Ashby, which leads me to think he might be a parish official, such as the clerk or a church warden, and not a family member in each case. Now, I recommend looking at the register as a whole, rather than just looking for the individual entry concerned. You might see that the next entry on the page shows a John Swinfield of Smithby marrying Jane Radford in November 1768. Is he the John who witnessed Alice's wedding in June? Perhaps he is her brother or cousin. As the entries don't give the condition of the party, bachelor, spinster, widow or widow, etc., it could even be her father, uncle or any male relative with the same surname. We just don't know at present, but it's something to bear in mind, so note it down. With the clue of Smisby from this marriage entry, we can go on to look for the baptism of Alice Swinfield. Her baptism is found indexed on the Derbyshire Baptismal Index on Findmypast. If you remember the tip I gave you in the last talk, you shouldn't look only for a specific event, but extract all entries of siblings, etc. So here are all the Swinfields of Smisby as shown on the online index. Here, there is an Alice baptised in 1744, which would make her around 24 when she married in June 1768. She does indeed have a brother called John, baptised in 1738, who could possibly be the witness at her marriage, and the groom mentioned in the marriage in November 1768, when he would be around 30. Their parents were John and Mary Swinfield. The naming patterns and the clues from the marriage entries make this family look very promising, though of course we must make the effort to look at the originals of these index entries to check out to see if there's any more information not noted online. Early registers are much more challenging. Note that registers before 1812 won't always be in a standard printed form, and the content will rely on how the vicar interpreted rules. Here we see a mixed register for St Wenard's in Herefordshire from 1745-6. The registers are in chronological order, with baptisms, marriages and burials mixed together. The register follows the church's year, from the 25th of March 1745 to the 24th of March 1745-6. The original records are at Herefordshire Record Office. As you can see, the biggest challenge will be deciphering the original handwriting and the condition of the original records. So you'll have to be flexible when checking how a name is spelled. It will rely on the vagaries of spelling by the clerk at the time, as well as the transcriber and indexer. I really can't stress enough how early registers vary in the information they contain. Here is a transcribed and published register of the parish of Llandinarbo in Herefordshire, held in the library of the Society of Genealogists. I've used it to show how varied the early entries in a register might be, and of course it's easier to read. People with status in the parish might have more information noted and be buried within the church itself, rather than in the graveyard outside. The vicar or clerk seems to be particularly gossipy here, so we hear about Maria Hoskins, the daughter of Reverend J. Hoskins, a rector of this parish, who dies outside the parish, but whose remains are returned to be buried in the chancel near her ancestors. I presume he didn't have as much to say about dear old Joan Williams, whose burial date is simply noted with no further annotation. And of course we don't actually know the age of Joan, as the burial registers before 1813 aren't required to note the age at burial, and this vicar has been quite consistent about when he gives information about ages, but he does sometimes. Thus we see that George William was an aged bachelor, and John Williams was a widower, aged 75, whose death was occasioned by being run over in the turnpike road by a man in liquor. Often it's only by looking at the register itself that you'll get any indication if there are gaps in the registers, or as in this case, no marriages were celebrated in the parish for a number of years. Many of the West Yorkshire registers created from around 1777 until 1812 are far more detailed than most parish records. If you're lucky enough to find a forebearer in what are known as Dade's registers, named after the official that instigated them, you'll discover their parents' and even grandparents' names, occupations and addresses are noted. You'll see similar informative registers used in the Diocese of Durham and occasionally elsewhere, but of course these extra generations and details are rare after the rules regarding registers were introduced in 1812. Now here is something interesting from the Findmypast website Register Transcripts for Smarden in Kent, which seem to show that Robert and Elizabeth Isted had 6 children all baptised on the same day. Cases of multiple baptisms don't always indicate twins, triplets, etc., or children of the same ages, and it's vital to see the contemporary register to see what's going on. These entries on Findmypast have been taken from transcriptions made by the Kent Family History Society, but as there's no actual online image to check, we've had to track them down in the way I've explained before. Here is the relevant entry for the Isted family in the Smarden Bishop's Transcripts. As you can see, the Isted children, christened on the 13th of May, range in ages from 18 down to 7, with an older married sister, Mary Drawbridge, also baptised as an adult. We can only speculate as to why this family group are baptised so late. Perhaps the family had dabbled with nonconformity in earlier years, or the vicar, noticing that Mary hadn't been baptised, ensured she and her younger siblings were sorted out. Perhaps Elizabeth was intending to marry and was required to be baptised. We don't know. But suffice to say, you must be flexible when looking for evidence of baptisms that may occur some time after the birth of a child. Hence, you might need to broaden your search date ranges considerably, as a baptism can occur a few weeks or several years after the birth. I should mention that the Bishop's Transcripts, or BTs as they are commonly known, are official copies sent annually from the parish to the diocesan authorities and deposited at the appropriate record office. These copies often date from Lady Day to Lady Day, i.e. they follow the church's year, 25th of March to the 24th of March the following year. They often supplement gaps and deficiencies in original registers. So, for example, the original registers in Smarden in Kent were deficient, with gaps from 1711 to 1730, and hence the only record for those years are found on the BTs, which is where we saw the Eistead family baptisms. The original registers for the parish of Llanwarn in Herefordshire, where my ancestors hail from, only survived from 1675. It would seem the parish was regularly flooded out until they finally moved the parish church in the early 19th century. But the BTs survived back a further 15 years to 1660 and supplement the gaps in the records. So I would also suggest establishing not only what records are online and if there are any gaps, but also checking whether the entries you are using in your research are taken from the ORs, the original registers, or the BTs, the bishop's transcripts. While many data sites are now using original registers that are held in local record office, many earlier online entries, and indeed published registers or transcripts, are drawn from BTs, as these tended to be collected together in one place and easier to film, abstract and index, when original records tended to be still in the parish. So it helps to compare ORs and BTs to see if any entries have been omitted or added, or if there are any discrepancies. Now, I'm afraid we're back to my Churchill family in Herefordshire that I talked about quite a lot in my previous talk. I'm looking for children of James and Martha, who married in 1803 in St Wenard's. I want to talk about spelling variants and the way various websites bring names that sound alike together. My surname is Churchill, and you'd expect anyone to know how to spell Churchill, but over the years it occurs as Churchill, Churchell, Churchelt, Churchet, Churchyat, Churchyard, Church and Churchill, often at the same time. The family search websites allows you to narrow down your search to a specific parish by drilling down to what it calls the batch number for that parish. So by doing so, I can identify anyone called Churchill christened or married in the parish. As the burials aren't included for this parish online, I'm obviously missing clues from the burial registers that I need to go back and examine in the original registers. Pulling out all the entries for a name is a good search technique. List them all out and put the entries into family groups so you can see what's going on. Look for siblings and their children who would be our ancestors' cousins. Don't just concentrate on the specific individual ancestor or generation. Spending time to make a good and accurate abstraction of all the relevant entries will save you time in the long run. You'll also note any gaps that might suggest missing registers or deficiencies in the records. The extraction earlier showed there are Churchills, many of whom are the children of James and Martha Church. However, there are some suspiciously long gaps between the baptisms, which makes me wonder if there are any other children that haven't shown up. So I took the opportunity to focus the search not by surname, but by searching for any children in the parish whose parents are James and Martha. This brought up extra children with the surname variants Church, Churchell, Churchet, etc. So one tip is not to rely on the database giving you all variant spellings of a name. Get to know the relevant variants that might occur with your name. I know that my family churchyard is often interchanged for Churchill, but the algorithms that group like-sounding surnames together don't account for this, so I have to search for this variant separately, or use a truncated search church asterisk to bring up all the odd endings of my surname. Once you've abstracted the entries, it's helpful to put them together into family groups. This is called family reconstruction. Try to make sense of the entries for everyone with the surname Patrick listed here. This is the family group or reconstruction that I've put together into a rough family tree. Note how I've question marked and used dotted lines for things I'm not sure about. It's unclear from the listing if that Edward Patrick, buried on the 5th of December 1723, is the father, son or brother of Richard, so I'm showing that uncertainty or speculation with a dotted line. Richard and Anne have two children, Elizabeth and Richard, as evidenced by a baptism and burial entry. Note I've used the double dating convention for events that occur between January and March, as it's not clear from the listing here if the dates are in the old style or new style according to the calendar changes made in 1752. It doesn't look like Richard and Anne married in this parish, nor was their daughter baptised here. This needs further research. It seems that Anne probably died before 1735 when Richard marries Elizabeth, but where is Anne buried? The registered were in a poor condition, and it isn't clear in what year Elizabeth was buried, but by making sure that you extract and list the entries in chronological order, it seems that she died after Richard, who was buried in 1742. Family reconstruction or grouping has helped make sense of these entries. Burials are often underused by family historians. If your ancestors lived till after 1812, then their age at death should be recorded in the burial register, making up perhaps for the information not being on their marriage records. In this instance, from the burial registers of Ashby-de-la-Zouch, we see the people living to a ripe old ages of 68, 82 and 97, though of course you should treat any evidence of death with caution in case the informant was out by a few years. The National Burial Index is a project coordinated by the Federation of Family History Societies to encourage local societies to transcribe and index burial registers, and much of this can be found on Findmypast, which will help you kill off your ancestors. Sometimes other records or sources can supplement the deficiencies in registers or add extra information. The Society of Genealogists probably holds the largest collection of what we call MIs, or monumental inscriptions, collected from tombstones and other monuments in local churchyards and cemeteries. Many of these have been recorded by local family history societies, who traditionally have deposited copies with the church itself, the local record office, and at the SOG. MIs are gradually coming online, published either by the local society itself or increasingly through Findmypast, who only last week added MIs from Essex, Worcestershire and Middlesex. The SOG has monumental inscriptions recorded from local headstones in the churchyard of the parish of Llandinarbo, recorded by the Herefordshire Family History Society in the 1980s. Amongst these MIs is a note of a decorated headstone with an inscription enclosed in an oval panel that reads, "In memory of Anne Churchill, buried 7th of July 1716, aged 41. But as you can see, this burial is not recorded in the published or original records of the parish, so the monumental inscription is, at the moment, the only evidence I have for Anne's death or burial. I've actually visited the graveyard and found the monument, only now the supposed age is no longer visible, presumably having deteriorated since the inscription was made. Now this could possibly be the Anne Churchill who was baptised in the neighbouring parish of Llanwan in 1677. Several other family members baptised in Llanwan are buried in Llandinarbo, but this only adds up if Anne was baptised at the age of around 2. I've also checked the burial registers of Llanwan in case Anne was buried there, and the monument was raised in the neighbouring parish, but she's not in the Llanwan registers either. So what do you think? Some gravestones or memorials may indicate a family plot or commemorate several generations buried there or possibly elsewhere. You could draw out quite intricate family trees with interesting biographical information and occupations for the Barber and Phipson families from these inscriptions on these two gravestones, or indeed from the Somerset MIs recording Walter and Judith Thomas of Ashcroft and what may be their daughter, Joanna Parker, transcribed from the MIs on Findmypast. Though I'd like to tell you that you can all trace your ancestors back to the beginnings of parish registers in 1538, I'm sure most of you have found that there are problems along the way. Many are damaged or missing. Indeed, only about 800 or so parishes have registers that survive back to that early date. Civil wars aren't conducive to keeping registers, so around the time of the mid-1600s, expect to find gaps or deficient records. This is known as the Commonwealth Gap. The improvement of transport, the changes in agriculture and industry in the 18th century, can instigate migration from one country parish to another country parish or into towns and cities. Not everyone attended the Anglican Church, and there is some argument amongst historians as to the extent of cohabitation and non-marriage before 1837. At certain times, taxes and other expenses discouraged people from baptism and marriage, or recording this in registers. And of course, we always have to consider that the original record may not have been kept as well as they should, and the difficulties of deciphering inconsistent and illegible records have their challenges. So if you can't find a baptism or don't know where to look, how might you find some clues to localise where the family might be found? Think about working and thinking laterally. Here is the marriage certificate of Francis Fewell, a 24-year-old bachelor marrying Susanna Matilda Hopkins in 1861. Both bride and groom were of the same address in Haggerston, Middlesex, but something is odd as Francis's father is described as William Batchelor, clearly a different surname to his son. What's going on? Perhaps this is a sign that Francis was illegitimate. Well, finding Francis's birth entry has proved challenging. Being 24 in 1861 means that he was born in or around 1837. Remember that registration didn't begin until the middle of the year on the 1st of July 1837, and there is a significant amount of under-registration in the early years of birth registrations, as the system didn't work as well as it should. So despite searching under FEWEL and Bachelor, there's no birth entry in the indexes. Therefore, we need to look for a baptism entry. But where? Well, of course, finding Francis in the 1861 census is essential, as that will tell us where he was born, and hence where to look for the baptism. I spoke last time about wildcard searching by address or just forename, and being creative with spelling when searching index records, and I had to use all of these techniques a few years ago to find Francis living at 3 Hope Place next door to his future bride, because, as you can see, the census enumerator here spelled his name F-U-E-L-L, not F-E-W-E-L-L, as on the marriage, and the traditional capital F looks rather like the old-fashioned way of writing a Q, so the name was originally indexed as Quell. How many people would think Quell was a variant of Fewell? As I said last time, the first letters of a surname are often the hardest to decipher. I have, of course, submitted a correction to Findmypast, and it's all indexed correctly now. Unfortunately, after all that effort, Francis merely gives his birth as the county of Essex. And for the purposes of this exercise, let us assume he says the same on all censuses that he appears in, as of course you will have checked those too. So how can we establish which of the 270 or so Essex parishes to search for the baptism? Can we discover if the name Fewell and variants are common in any particular parish? Now, I'm sure all good genealogists are aware of the really useful genealogical guides compiled by Jeremy Gibson, known as the Gibson Guides, published by the Family History Partnership and available from any good genealogical bookshop, including the Society of Genealogists. His guide to marriage indexes is useful to show if any local society or genealogist has indexed marriages for a particular county and where that index might be found if it's not yet online. At the time we did this search, much more indexing had been done on marriages before 1837 than christenings. The guide tells me that the marriage index compiled by Percival Boyd and held by the Society of Genealogists and online on Findmypast has a very good coverage of Essex, so thinking laterally, can we use a number of marriages for the surname Fewell to see if the name can be localised to a particular parish? So we search Boyd's marriage index for any Fewell and variant marriages in Essex between about 1775 and 1837 and sorted the results into parish, as you can do on the Findmypast website. We then plotted these entries onto a map. You can use sophisticated map distribution software to do this, but I'm quite good at old-fashioned colouring in. As you can see, there was a small cluster of parishes where the marriages occurred, suggesting to me that the name might be quite common there, and narrowing down considerably the number of potential parishes to search and original registers to look at. I'm glad to say we found an entry in the registers of Great Canfield in Essex for a Francis, son of Mary Fewell, baptised in that parish. Of course, we did that localisation search using Boyd's marriage index some time ago, and more resources have come online since then, including an index of Essex baptisms on Findmypast, which has the entry we found in the original registers. However, I still think the exercise in thinking laterally and using any source with a good coverage of the area concerned to localise a name holds true. As there can be challenges and problems using parish registers, it's important to build up your evidence. Look for name-rich supplementary information to add or provide an alternative to information in parish registers. Were your ancestors married by licence or banns? Can you find local parish records, church wardens' accounts, vestry minutes or parish apprenticeships, for example? Look for local tax and local rate records. Look for local directories. Search for information about your ancestors' occupations or their taxed apprenticeship records. Use poor law records. Can you find church court wills or church court ecclesiastical causes in which your ancestors might be mentioned? Are there any land and property records? I'm going to show examples from a few of these to show how they can supplement information from parish registers before 1837. If you find a marriage entry in registers, it will, if after 1753, always tell you if the marriage occurred after the calling of banns or the issuing of a licence from the church authorities. This, of course, also happened before Hardwicke's Act, but that just ensured the required procedures were noted or recorded in special books called banns books. The banns were called in both the bride and groom's parish, so this may be a clue as to where either party came from. When we talk about licences, we're actually talking about 3 documents. There is the bond, which meant a sum of money would be forfeited by a bondsman should the marriage not be valid under church law. Often bondsmen mentioned in the bonds might be family members. The allegation alleged that there was no reason that the couple should not marry. It required them to state that they had not been pre-contracted to another party, or that the marriage would not be invalid due to consanguinity, or that they were related under church law. Although, of course, church law allowed cousins to marry, and they often did. The bond and allegation remain with the licensing court, while the third document is the licence itself, which was taken by the couple to present to the parish to show they had permission to marry there. Banns and licence records can add to the information found in the parish register. If the transcribed and indexed online entry doesn't indicate whether the marriage took place by banns or licence, it's always worth following that up. It turns out that the 1755 marriage of Reuben Baldwin and Elizabeth Stafford in Penshurst in Kent was performed after the calling of banns on 3 consecutive Sundays, and the banns book tells us that Reuben was from the parish of Ightham, which is not noted in the online transcription of the register. In this marriage licence allegation for the marriage of Samuel Pettican and Margaret Theedon in 1750, held at the Essex Record Office, we see that Samuel was a 50-year-old bachelor and his bride was a 30-year-old spinster. Without this clue of his age, I had great difficulty looking for Samuel's baptism because I made the assumption that he married in his 20s and was in fact looking far too late. Although both parties were of Great Birch, the licence allowed them to marry either at that parish or St Mary's, Colchester. While I often remind people that a girl could marry as young as 12 and a boy as young as 14 if they had the permission of their parents, most young people waited till they were of age, i.e. over 21, and had the means to support themselves. That means while the average age of marriage is probably around 25, many married much later. The Society of Genealogists Library has many published and unpublished indexes to marriage licence records to help track down if the licence was issued and where it is held. Marriage licences were issued by the various church courts, including the Archbishop of Canterbury's faculty and Vicar General offices, which sat at Doctors' Commons in London, and which are indexed by the Society of Genealogists on Findmypast. While there were rules which supposedly governed when a marriage should be licensed by these superior or higher courts, in practice many Londoners acquired licences here, so it's always worth checking both the Archbishop's faculty and Vicar General allegations, as well as the local licensing court. The original records for the Archbishop's licences are at Lambeth Palace, but the SOG has microfilms and provides copies when required. This is a licence allegation for the marriage of the poets Robert Browning and Elizabeth Barrett, to be married at either Deptford, which was then Kent, or Marylebone, which was then Middlesex. If you can't find an event recorded in the Anglican Church records, it's worth considering whether your ancestors were perhaps nonconformists and attended a church or chapel of a different denomination. A sign of nonconformity might be the use of old-fashioned Old Testament biblical names like Ebenezer or Shadrach, or you might find only a marriage of the parents but no baptism of the children in that parish. Remember, most nonconformists were obliged to marry in Anglican churches after 1753, but they certainly didn't have to have their children baptised there, and they may have travelled some distance to find a denomination, chapel or preacher to their tastes. Many surviving nonconformists and non-parochial records are now at the National Archives, in the series RG4 to 8, and many of these are online, including some on Findmypast and Family Search. The nonconformist records indexed on Findmypast include entries from the dissenting registry at Dr. Williams's library, one of several established in the 18th century for nonconformists to register a birth rather than use an Anglican baptism for formal purposes. These registers were redundant once civil registration of births was introduced in 1837, but thousands used their services. As you go back, it gets harder, of course, and there are often reasons for that. Finding a marriage before the rules were tightened up in 1753 can be challenging. Some parishes, especially in London, considered themselves free from the control of their bishops, and hence these became places where licences might be performed away from the public gaze without banns or licence. Parishes claiming these so-called liberties included St James Duke's Place, where the vicar was suspended for 3 years towards the end of the 17th century for conducting marriages without banns or licence. Other places included Holy Trinity Minories, the Tower of London and the Mint, but the most infamous area was that known as the Liberties of the Fleet Prison, where the marriages were performed in taverns, alehouses and brandy shops surrounding the Fleet Prison. About 250,000 marriages are recorded in the informal records of the Fleet marriage registers, which are now at the National Archives in the series RG7. For example, RG7, piece 37, folio 35, includes marriages from the Fleet registers performed according to the rules of the Fleet, London, from 1715 to 1728 by ministers Gower, Wagstaff, Meredith, Gaynham and others, and include the registers kept by Roberts at the Lamb Fleet Ditch. This register includes a note of the marriage of Elizabeth Tritton to a Mr Hanwell on August 1720. Both came from Christchurch. Sometimes vicars, acting as surrogates or agents of the diocesan registries, abused their position and issued licences to those they technically shouldn't. The curate of St Botolph, Aldgate, was notorious for issuing thousands of such licences, but this nefarious activity wasn't confined to London or other big cities. William Sweetapple, the rector of Fledbury in Nottingham, was another who was known for performing a speedy, irregular marriage by a licence that he issued himself. In the 14 years before he became a minister, just 6 marriages were performed in this small place, but between 1728 and 1754 he performed 488 irregular marriages. These abuses were prohibited under Hardwicke's Act, but show that you may need to look quite far afield for a marriage before 1754 and discover where your local foreign marrying churches are, where ministers granted licences to marry in foreign or distant churches, some way away from where the couples lived. The records of the Consistory Court of Canterbury down in Kent show that the Vicar of the Parish of Tong made a public penance for his malpractice, saying that he dishonoured his ministry by his constant habitual course and practice of marrying all sorts of people, both of his own and other parishes, without banns or licence. So, if you're looking for marriages, search the parish registers where the child was baptised, where the parish registers of the mother's family's parish, the parish registers of the father's family's parish, immediate neighbouring parishes, and find out if there are any foreign marrying parishes known to be in the area. Use, of course, finding aids and indexes, Family Search, the IGI, and digital index registers on major websites. County marriage indexes compiled by local family history societies are often online or at the local record office. Boyd's Marriage Index is a useful source of millions of marriages. Try London as a magnet for quiet or irregular weddings. Remember that Vicar General and Faculty Office marriage licences, as well as the Bishop of London and lower court marriage licences, were issued for marriages in London. Boyd's Marriage Index has good coverage of London, especially before 1754, and of course consider the Fleet Registers and other foreign marrying churches and chapels in London. Researching London ancestors present their own problems and difficulties as the capital city grew in population. I really recommend Cliff Webb's book, My Ancestors Were Londoners, especially if you have that perennial problem of a couple simply turning up in an urban parish, having children in the mid to late 1700s, but with little indication of where they married or came from. The book is published by the Society of Genealogists and available from the online bookshop. If you're researching London city families before about 1750, I do think the 60,000 family group sheets compiled by Percival Boyd and indexed on Findmypast is a useful indication about whether your London families might have been early inhabitants of London or a newish incomer in the late 18th century. Thus far, we've looked at the problems with searching parish registers and records that can supplement them. Of course, knowing what your ancestors did in their lives can provide vital clues. So we're back to the basic questions. Who are you looking for? What kind of person are they? Where and when did they live? And let me throw in a few thoughts. Of course, there's no definitive list of agricultural labourers before the census years. People move around for their jobs. Craftsmen and trades were once regulated but become much less so after the early 19th century. The more mobile and less skilled your ancestor was, the fewer records there will be, and self-employed people are probably easier to trace. Perhaps apprenticeships illustrate this most. It's actually easier to find evidence of an apprenticeship in the 1750s rather than the 1850s for a number of reasons that have resulted in useful records showing how your ancestors achieved their occupations. A tax was levied on apprenticeships from 1710. The City of London and other major cities and towns regulated trades and crafts and voting rights through apprenticeship and city freedoms. One of the means of becoming a freeman was through apprenticeship. The burden on parishes to deal with troublesome poor was such that many apprenticed young children as young as 8 into menial, long-lasting apprenticeships. They were nothing more than servitude. This means that there are often records of apprenticeship throughout what is known as the long 18th century. Let's have a look at the apprenticeship trail Charles Paget shows, because this illustrates how piecing together as many records as you can builds up the story and adds clues and shows how different ends of the story end up in different record offices. Charles Paget was apprenticed by his father John Paget of Egham in Surrey to Josiah Southam, a distiller, in 1732. The tax records in TNA's IR1 series of records, indexed on Findmypast as Britain's Country Apprentices 1710 to 1808, shows the premium of £84 that his father paid to get Charles the apprenticeship, and that's where the tax comes in. The apprenticeship is recorded in the Distillers' Company Apprentice Records from the Guildhall in London, which are also indexed on Findmypast as part of the London City Apprenticeship Abstracts. Such apprenticeships usually occur when the child is around 14 to 16 years old, and the apprentice agreement lasts for about 7 years. Coincidentally, the family's copy of this original indenture is lodged in the Society of Genealogists' Apprentice Indenture collections. This explains the conditions that the apprentice and the master agree to for the period of the agreement. The apprentice will serve his master faithfully, keep his secrets, and obey lawful commandments. He will not haunt taverns, play dice or card games, commit fornication, or contract to marry within the terms of his apprenticeship. The master will provide clothes and board and lodging and teach his apprentice the mystery of his craft. It's only in this record that we learn that the occupation of Charles's father, John Paget of Egham, is that of a clerk, which I take to be a clerk in holy orders. It's not recorded in the tax or guild record. Apprenticeships for poor children can be found in the local parish chest records, though this 1736 parish apprenticeship from St Margaret's, Westminster, is at the SOG rather than the Westminster Archives. Often the boys and girls were apprenticed as young as 8 until they were 21 to learn husbandry, i.e. tending to animals, or learn housewifery. Often the child is sent some considerable distance, though in this case young Thomas is apprenticed to a yeoman in the neighbouring parish of St George, Hanover Square. Lincolnshire Parish Apprenticeships are all indexed by the Lincolnshire Family History Society and online through Findmypast, and many local societies are working on similar projects. Here we see that Thomas Turner, a poor child of Epworth, was apprenticed to Cornelius Chamberlain of Epworth in 1749, and, as it says, to learn some honest way of livelihood. In larger borough towns and cities like Bristol, Canterbury, Coventry and York, being apprenticed to a freeman of the city was one means of becoming a freeman of the city yourself, and hence being allowed to vote and trade freely in the town before the 1832 electoral reforms. Other ways of becoming a freeman included being the son of a freeman or marrying a freeman's daughter, all useful clues for the genealogist, as parents and spouses are named. These records are often published. These 1774 extracts from the Bristol Burgess books from the Bristol Archives show how various men became freemen. Thomas Dagg, a house carpenter, was admitted to the liberties of the city as he was the son of Abraham Dagg, deceased, also a house carpenter. George Evans, a house carpenter, was admitted to the liberties of the city as he was apprenticed to Samuel Games. John Cullum was admitted because he married Anne, the daughter of David Evans, a tailor. John Turner, a brass founder, was admitted as a freeman as he has married Mary, the daughter of John Hicks, a brass founder. If you're interested in Bristol Burgesses, then the Bristol and Avon Family History Society has published an index of these records for the years 1557 to 1995, and the CD is at the SOG. And here are the apprentice rolls for the city of Bristol, showing that Richard Turner, the son of John Turner, late of the town of Leicester, a dyer, was apprenticed to William Beechcoff, brass founder and brazier, and Mary his wife for 7 years. Intriguingly, it says friends are to find apparel and washing in this case. This young man had come some distance to learn his trade. Early directories list merchants and businessmen, and the Society has a good collection of these name-rich lists. For example, our directories for Cornwall go back to 1783. The University of Leicester has made many facsimiles of early local directories freely available online to look at. Here, for example, is a page from the 1792 to 1798 Universal British Directory for Basingstoke, showing tradesmen, artisans and shopkeepers. If your ancestors were freemen, merchants, tradesmen, etc., they may have been entitled to vote. Lists of those who voted were published for each parliamentary election from 1696. Here we see an alphabetical list of men who voted and where they lived in the borough of Leicester in 1741. This is one of the many early poll books at the SOG, and many can be found in good libraries and record offices. Well, it's fine your ancestors had apprenticeships and did so well in life that they became entitled to vote, but what about your ancestors who fell on hard times? An old genealogical textbook, published around the time the Society was founded in 1911, has a chapter on the records of the old and new poor laws that it calls the genealogy of the submerged, and sometimes I do think our ancestors disappeared under the burden of poverty. While a talk on the records generated by the poor laws could easily last another hour, I want to show some examples of what records might knock down a fundamental brick wall, showing where they came from and where did they go. This settlement examination of William Bridge, a militiaman in the Sussex Regiment of Militia, taken upon oath on the 4th of February 1779, shows that local JPs were anxious to prove his parish of settlement, i.e. where could they send him once he became a burden on the parish. William's account shows he moved considerably. He was born in the parish of Childridge in the county of Essex. That upon New Michaelmas Day in 1776 he bargained with Mrs. Beard of Frittenden in the county of Kent, and there he served a full year and received wages, but had done nothing else to receive a legal settlement elsewhere. The settlement certificates for Daniel Martin in the Winchester and Maidstone county record offices show two ends of the story, where he moved from and to. The overseers of Fordingbridge in Hampshire acknowledge that Daniel Martin, his wife Winifred, and children William and Daniel are legally settled in Fordingbridge in Hampshire. Daniel takes a copy of this certificate with him when he goes to Merryworth in Kent to prove that he won't be a burden on the parish, and should something untoward happen, then the parish officials of Merryworth can send him back. When families became a burden on the parish, then they could be removed, and there will be orders and accounts for removal in the local county quarter session records and the parish records. Again, there are some interesting index examples of Lincolnshire removal orders indexed on Findmypast, and other local family history societies have done similar projects. I just thought I'd finish up by inflicting some more of my own Churchill family history on you. The most informative document I have found relating to my family isn't online. It's a note of a mortgage and 3 lives lease made in 1790 and again in 1796 within the records of the manor of Hawarden and the Herefordshire Record Office. It shows the transfer of land in Windmill Hill in the parish of Llanwan in Herefordshire and mentions tenancies going back to 4 generations of Churchills, confirming the entries in the parish register and their movement from Llanwan to other parishes. So we've drawn to the end of our talk, looking at how you can use parish and other records to bring together family history information. I hope some of the supplementary records that I've described might fill in gaps and provide clues as to how to break down your genealogical brick walls. There are many records used by family historians that might help. The answer is to keep looking, take good notes, and keep putting your assumptions to the test. If they hold up to scrutiny, you're doing well, and I wish you all luck in researching before 18